accomplish that I have plans for the following day. He said this: work, work, work from early until late. In fact, I have so much to do that I shall spend the first 3 hours in prayer. He said, but I'm not accomplishing anything. Do you know that I talked to a pastor recently, a pastor friend, and we were discussing different things, and he actually said something to this effect. He said, I don't feel as productive. He said, it's horrible to say this, but I'm just going to be honest. He said, I don't feel as productive when I'm praying. So we gotten into this mode of, I need to study it, I need to do all these things. Well, where's prayer? We're stopping, pausing, putting a pause on the world. Putting a pause on everything that circles and cycles around you all over, and just saying, I'm going to stop and take time to talk to God. And that's not just requesting things from God. It may be interceding for somebody. It may be confessing and saying, God, maybe the first prayer is this: God, I don't even want to take time to pray. You're just being honest with God. Maybe it has to start there. Martin Luther also said this. He says, if I fail to spend 2 hours in prayer each morning, the devil gets the victory throughout the day. I have so much busyness, I cannot go without spending at least 3 hours daily in prayer. I've got so much to do that I can't but spend time praying. Maybe it is in your life, the reason why it seems like nothing ever seems to fit together is you're not taking time to see it from God's perspective and to ask for his help. 1 Thessalonians 5:17 says simply, pray without ceasing. Maybe that can be the first verse that you memorize. You can memorize it here this morning. Pray without ceasing. 1 Thessalonians 5:17. Casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. 1 Peter 5:7. James 4:2, the first few words, you lust and have not, you kill and desire to have and cannot obtain, you fight and war and you have not. Why? Because you ask not. There was a book I read one time, I think it was called The Prayer of Jabez, okay, a prayer that he prays in the Old Testament, and it didn't talk a lot about that prayer, but it, basically the author went into this elaborate illustration about the fact that, you know, he had a dream one time that he woke up in heaven, and he's looking around heaven, you know, with an angel that's carrying him around, and he looks around and he sees this big pole barn, just this massive pole barn. He was kind of curious about what's in it, so he wanders over there and gets in there, opens up the door, and he sees all these presents piled up to the ceiling. Just this massive building, presents piled up to the ceiling. And he asks the angel, he's like, what is this building? What is this about? And the angel paused and he said, well, this is all the things that God wanted to give you on earth, but you never asked for. Is there a building in heaven like that? I have no idea. But you know what? When I get there, I hope it's not full of a bunch of things that God wanted to give me, but I never asked. You have not because you ask not. Matthew 26, Christ said something to this effect where he said this. So he cometh unto the disciples and findeth them asleep and saith unto them, Peter, what? Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Watch and pray. I remember a while ago now, Patrick and I were working out together, and Patrick helped center me on this in particular. I would, and I do this for a lot of different things I do. When I get focused, again, I don't drink water. There's a lot of things I don't do that are probably really helpful to do. But one of those things is also breathing. Breathing right. Anyway, breathing in the right way. And, I do like a set of whatever, 20 push-ups, and not breathe during the entire time. It's not very good practice to get into. It's not very good for your body. But I do think I think many of us as Christians get into practice that isn't good. Just like breathing is good for our physical body, so praying is good for our spiritual body, right? It's like the breath for our spirit. You know, sometimes I think in our Christian lives we take one big heaping breath and we try to hold our breath for as long as we can until finally we just have to cry out to God again. And I think God's waiting there going, well, why did you wait so long? Take the time to pray. The third core for us, so these two are not as long. The first two are a little bit longer. Read God's word, take time to pray. The third core is simply this: respond in obedience. You know, when you take time to get into God's word and to truly ask God to show you something, He's going to show you all sorts of things. And as you take time to pray about those things, maybe even confess and say, God, I haven't seen this before. Would you forgive me? Would you help me? Would you equip me to do these very things that you want me to do? The next thing that's going to take place is respond in obedience to what God says to do. Just simply do it. It's a simple step, but it's an important one. Zechariah 6:15 says this. I'm going to skip down to the end of the verse. Last 3 lines it says, and this shall come to pass if you will diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God. It's amazing in that you can go back and look at all that God is saying there in Zechariah 6, the building of God's house and doing all these different things. He says, all it requires is you to just diligently obey what I tell you to do. That's it. That's all I'm requiring. It's simple and it's hard at the same time. You know, I think God says the same thing to every single one of us. Just diligently obey my voice. That's what God says to us. Listen to God's voice and obey. You know, in Revelation 3, all the different churches there at the end of the church age, or however people want to see that, the different churches, every single one, it says, hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. I'm convinced that still in 2019, God is speaking to His churches. Sometimes we just don't have the ears to hear what He's actually saying. Finally, at the very last church, He says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Christ at the end of the church age is actually outside of the church, knocking, hoping to get into the church. How sad a picture is that? But I think that also happens in our own lives, is we're not willing to diligently obey what God says to do. Respond in obedience. And core number 4, gather for accountability. This is one of those things that God says in His Word, and as you read through God's Word, you would find this to be part of the case. From beginning to end, there was these things that God was doing to gather together people, to be able to equip them to go out and do those things that God wanted them to do. Gathered together for worship and equipping, scattered for service and discipling the nations. Hebrews 10, verses 24 and 25 says this, let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. God means for us to come together to challenge and encourage one another. In the book of Acts, this took place on a very, very frequent basis. In fact, it was daily. I'm not necessarily saying that's how we need to meet. What I am saying is this: sometimes I think we get this in our minds, like, well, you know, maybe weekly, maybe you get the priesthood, right? The Christmas and Easter individuals who come Christmas and Easter to church or whatever. But here God says, exhorting one another, and so much more. Hebrews 3:13 says, but exhort one another daily while it's called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. In 1 Peter 5:8, it says to resist the devil. Talk about resisting the devil other places as well. So be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. He wants to devour individuals. We recently, I watched a National Geographic. I like to from time to time. I can't say I always do this, but I watched them recently, and this kind of thought came to mind because there was some wolves that were trying to get at these water buffalo. Okay, they were trying to do these different things, water buffalo or some sort of animal like this, and they were trying to separate out the pack. They just wanted to get one. All the pack, when they were together, these animals, whatever they were, when they were together, they were too formidable for these wolves to be able to take them. But they can